History is filled with tyrants, despots, rulers whose names have become synonymous with cruelty. Yet, few figures capture the imagination quite like Caligula. His name alone conjures images of depravity, madness, and unchecked power.
He is the emperor who supposedly declared war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to whip the waves, and collecting seashells as spoils of war. He is the man who allegedly planned to make his beloved horse, Incitatus, a consul, the highest political office in Rome. The legend of Caligula is a potent cocktail of sexual perversion, senseless violence, and godlike arrogance. These stories, told and retold for nearly 2,000 years, have cemented his reputation as the ultimate mad emperor. But is this the whole truth? Is it possible a ruler could be so completely unhinged, so cartoonishly evil? As we peel back the layers of legend and look closer at the world he inhabited, a more complex, perhaps more fascinating picture emerges.
To understand the man who would become Caligula, we must first understand the blood that flowed through his veins. He was the product of the most powerful dynasty in Roman history. His parents were Rome's celebrity power couple, the adored General Germanicus and the formidable Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus himself. His earliest memories were not of palaces, but of the rough world of a military camp. His mother, Agrippina, insisted on bringing her children to the front lines.
The soldiers, charmed by the sight, affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, Little Boot. It was a term of endearment, a sign he was one of them. In AD 17, Germanicus was granted a triumph in Rome. The young Gaius shared the chariot, basking in the reflected adoration of the masses. He saw firsthand the immense power of public spectacle, a lesson in political theater that would stay with him for the rest of his life. But the family's glory was short-lived. In AD 19, while on a diplomatic mission in the East, Germanicus fell gravely ill. On his deathbed he became convinced he had been poisoned. His death sent a shockwave of grief across the empire. Agrippina began the long, sorrowful journey back to Rome, carrying her husband's ashes, a powerful and public accusation. Back in Rome, Agrippina's open hostility towards Emperor Tiberius created a bitter feud. Her home became the center of political opposition, placing her entire family in mortal danger. The ambitious prefect Sejanus saw his opportunity. He systematically turned the paranoid emperor against Agrippina and her sons, portraying them as traitors. In AD 29, the hammer fell. Agrippina and her eldest son Nero were declared public enemies and banished. Nero would soon be forced to self-delete. His second brother Drusus was arrested and starved to death in the dungeons beneath the palace. The family was being systematically annihilated. Gaius was spared, likely due to his youth and the protection of his grandmother Antonia. But he was a powerless observer, learning that in Rome, family loyalty was a death sentence.
In AD 31, at the age of 19, Gaius received the summons that must have felt like a death sentence. He was to join Emperor Tiberius on the island of Capri. He was entering the lion's den, the spider's web from which the orders for his family's destruction had come. His life now depended on his ability to play a part. He became a master actor, hiding his true feelings behind an impenetrable mask of fawning admiration. The historian Tacitus famously wrote of him,
"There was never a better slave or a worse master."
He had to endure every insult, every psychological jab, with unnerving calm. When news of his mother's and brother's deaths arrived, he could show no grief. In this treacherous environment, Gaius found an unlikely protector, the new Praetorian prefect, Macro. Seeing Gaius as his best bet for the future, Macro began to shield and promote the young prince. But Tiberius was not entirely fooled. He allegedly remarked that he was rearing a viper for the Roman people, yet for his own cynical reasons he allowed Gaius to live.
On March 16, AD 37, Tiberius finally died. The long wait was over, the prisoner was free, and in the place of the cage stood the throne of the Roman world. Ave Imperator. Thanks to Macro's careful preparations, the Praetorian Guard immediately hailed Gaius as the new emperor. The will, naming a co-heir, was swept aside. His journey to Rome was a triumphant parade. The dark cloud of Tiberius's reign had lifted, replaced by the bright promise of a new era led by the beloved son of Germanicus. The city erupted. For the next 7 months, the empire lived in a state of euphoria. Philo of Alexandria called it a true golden age.
He declared an end to the reign of terror, publicly burning the records of the treason trials and recalling political exiles. In a powerful act of filial piety, he personally retrieved the ashes of his mother and brother, restoring their honor and his family's dignity. He was visible, accessible, and engaging. He was not just a ruler, he was one of the people, and they adored him for it. For 7 glorious months, Rome believed it had found its savior. The memory of Tiberius's dark, reclusive final years evaporated under the brilliant sun of Caligula's reign. He was everything the people craved, young, charismatic, and generous to a fault. He abolished unjust taxes, staged magnificent games, and welcomed exiles back to the city. It was a euphoric, empire-wide celebration, a collective sigh of relief that the future was finally in safe hands. The son of the beloved Germanicus had come home and fulfilled his destiny. But the Roman fates are notoriously cruel. As the golden summer faded into a damp autumn in 37 AD, a shadow fell over the Palatine Hill. The unthinkable happened. The vibrant young emperor was struck down by a mysterious and violent illness. Ancient sources struggling for a diagnosis called it a brain fever. He was consumed by heat, unable to sleep, and tormented by delirium. For weeks he hovered between life and death. The news spread from the palace like a plague itself, first in hushed whispers, then in panicked cries. The golden age, it seemed, was about to be extinguished before it had truly begun. The entire Roman Empire held its breath. The public reaction was not just affection, it was sheer terror. The Augustan system had brought peace, but it was a peace dependent on the stability of one man. With Caligula dying, the specter of civil war, the most profound fear in the Roman psyche, loomed once more. All across the empire, life ground to a halt. In Rome, crowds gathered outside the palace gates, maintaining a desperate, round-the-clock vigil. People from all walks of life made vows to the gods, offering their own lives in exchange for his. They had tasted hope, and the thought of it being snatched away was unbearable. And then, a miracle. The fever broke. Caligula would live. He survived. But as he slowly regained his strength and emerged from the suffocating confines of the sick room, it became chillingly clear that the man who went into the fever was not the man who came out. The physical shell was the same, but the spirit within was broken or perhaps irrevocably twisted. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a brooding intensity. The kind, generous youth had vanished, and in his place stood someone haunted, arrogant, cruel, and frighteningly erratic. The light in Rome's eyes had returned to the throne, but he had brought an impenetrable darkness back with him. For 2,000 years, historians have debated what truly happened in that sick room. What was the nature of this transformation? One theory points to physical damage, a severe case of viral encephalitis or meningitis which could have permanently damaged the frontal lobes of his brain, the very center of personality, empathy, and impulse control. Another possibility is that the illness triggered a latent mental condition. The Julio-Claudian bloodline was notoriously volatile, a dynasty plagued by depression, paranoia, and violent instability. Perhaps the fever simply unlocked a genetic inheritance that was always waiting. A third theory is purely psychological. In surviving death, did Caligula come to believe he was more than mortal? The intense adulation of the masses, combined with the terror of his own fragility, could have shattered his psyche, creating a paranoid god complex. Or perhaps the most chilling theory is that there was no transformation at all. Maybe the illness simply stripped away a carefully constructed facade. The charming boy was an act, a necessary performance for survival. Now, with absolute power secured, the mask could come off, revealing the true Caligula, forged in the trauma and terror of his childhood. Whatever the cause, the consequences were immediate and bloody. The purges began. Caligula started to methodically eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat, a rival, or a reminder of his former vulnerability. His first victim was a man of unimpeachable character and a pillar of the state, his own father-in-law, Marcus Junius Silanus. The pretext for his removal was patently absurd. Caligula accused the elderly senator of refusing to accompany him on a sea voyage, interpreting this as a silent wish for the emperor to be shipwrecked and killed. It was a paranoid fantasy, but it was enough. Stripped of his honors and facing a sham trial, the respected aristocrat was forced to take his own life. The message to the Senate was brutal and clear. Lineage, loyalty, and even family ties meant nothing. No one was safe. Next on the list was his own cousin and co-heir, the young Tiberius Gemellus. As the biological grandson of the previous emperor, Gemellus represented a potential, if powerless, alternative to Caligula's rule. His very existence was an intolerable annoyance. The charge against him was even more ludicrous than the one against Silanus. Suffering from a persistent cough, the boy had been using a common remedy. Caligula, in a fit of manufactured paranoia, declared the medicine's scent was that of an antidote, proving Gemellus was plotting to poison the emperor. The sentence was death, but the murder was as pathetic as it was cruel. The young man, having lived a sheltered life, reportedly did not even know how to kill himself. A centurion had to be dispatched to guide the boy's hand, forcing the blade into his own throat. It was a cold-blooded execution of a political ghost. Finally, Caligula turned on the kingmaker himself, Naevius Sutorius Macro, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. It was Macro who had engineered Caligula's smooth accession, who had secured the loyalty of the soldiers, and who had been his staunchest protector. But Macro knew too much. He remembered Caligula as a nervous youth. He was a living reminder that the emperor's power had been given, not simply taken. For the new Caligula, such a man could not be allowed to live. Alongside his wife, Ennia, who had once been Caligula's lover, Macro was accused of a litany of crimes and forced into suicide. With his death, the last check on Caligula's absolute power was removed. The mentor, the father-in-law, the cousin, all were gone. The stage was now clear. The Golden Age was definitively over, its bright dawn forgotten in the terrifying twilight that was now descending upon Rome. With the last vestiges of restraint gone, Caligula's megalomania exploded. The Roman tradition established by Augustus was that an emperor could be deified but only after death. He was the first citizen, not a god among men. Caligula shattered this political fiction. He demanded to be worshipped as a living, present god. He began appearing in public dressed as various deities like Jupiter and Neptune. He established his own priesthood, forcing the wealthiest citizens to pay exorbitant sums for the honor of serving him. Temples were built to his own godhead, and in a move of supreme arrogance, he ordered the heads of revered statues of gods throughout the empire to be removed and replaced with his own likeness. This self-deification soon ignited a crisis that threatened to plunge the Eastern Empire into war. Caligula conceived his most inflammatory plan: to erect a colossal golden statue of himself within the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Jerusalem. To the monotheistic Jews, this was the ultimate act of sacrilege, a defilement that would provoke mass rebellion. A Jewish delegation led by the philosopher Philo of Alexandria pleaded with the emperor, but Caligula met their desperation with mockery. He tasked the governor of Syria, Petronius, with marching legions into Judea to install the statue by force. Petronius, understanding this was a death sentence for thousands, risked his own life by delaying, while vast crowds of Jews protested peacefully, vowing to die before their temple was desecrated. The province stood on a knife's edge. It was only Caligula's assassination that prevented the bloodbath. At home, Caligula waged a psychological war against the Roman elite. He harbored a deep resentment for the Senate, the ancient institution that symbolized the lost republic. His cruelty was a form of perverse political theater, staged to demonstrate his absolute power and their impotence. He would force distinguished senators to run for miles beside his chariot like footmen.
At his banquets, men who had once commanded legions were made to wait on him, dressed as slaves. He would interrupt solemn proceedings with fits of laughter, and when asked why, would chillingly reply that he was amused by the thought that,
"I could have you all killed with a nod."
This was a systematic deconstruction of the dignity of the aristocratic class, leaving them paralyzed by fear.
His attacks on the senators' public standing were matched by his assaults on their private honor. The Roman concept of was linked to the household, and the chastity of a wife was paramount to a nobleman's reputation. Caligula delighted in violating this sacred boundary. During his lavish dinners, he would theatrically inspect the wives of his guests, commenting on their physical attributes. He would then select one, lead her away to his private chambers, and later return to loudly announce a detailed and often critical review of her performance in bed, all while her husband sat frozen in silent public humiliation. This predatory behavior was coupled with persistent rumors of incest with his three sisters, particularly Drusilla, whom he had loved obsessively and later deified. As his reign descended into autocracy, Caligula's projects became monuments to his own ego, draining the state treasury. The most spectacular was a temporary floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae.
He ordered the confiscation of thousands of merchant ships, causing a grain shortage in Rome.
These ships were anchored in a double line stretching over 2 miles, with a road built on top. The purpose? A 2-day festival of pointless pageantry. On the first day, Caligula, wearing what he claimed was the breastplate of Alexander the Great, rode his horse across the bridge. On the second, he paraded in a chariot. Suetonius suggests the stunt was to defy a prophecy that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. It was a testament to a man who believed he could bend reality to his will. If the bridge was extravagant folly, his planned invasion of Britain was a masterclass in the absurd. In 40 AD, Caligula marched his legions to the northern coast of Gaul, positioning them on the shores of the English Channel. The stage was set for a glorious conquest. The army was arrayed in battle formation, the trumpets sounded. Then came the emperor's baffling order. He commanded his legionaries to lay down their arms and collect seashells. The hardened veterans were ordered to fill their helmets with the spoils of the ocean. Historians debate this moment. Was it madness? A punishment for a rumored mutiny? Regardless, the effect was profound humiliation. Caligula declared a triumphant victory over Neptune himself, and had the shells shipped back to Rome to be displayed as war trophies. But of all the tales of Caligula's eccentricities, none has captured the imagination quite like his beloved horse, Incitatus. This was no ordinary steed. Incitatus lived in a marble stable, with an ivory manger draped in purple blankets and wearing a collar of precious stones. He even had his own house and slaves to entertain dignitaries invited in the horse's name. Caligula then announced his intention to make Incitatus a consul, the highest office in Rome. It is unlikely he was serious. The gesture was almost certainly a calculated piece of political satire, the ultimate expression of his contempt for the Senate. By suggesting his horse could perform the duties of a consul, he was declaring that the office and the men who held it were utterly worthless. It was a joke with a terrifyingly sharp edge, a final, absurd demonstration that in Caligula's Rome, only his own mad will held any power.
By the bitter winter of January AD 41, the city of Rome was a cauldron of fear and suppressed fury. 4 years of Caligula's reign had stretched the patience of the elite to its breaking point. His financial extortions had bled their fortunes dry, his public humiliations had stripped them of their dignity, and his escalating megalomania, which demanded he be worshipped as a living god, threatened the very fabric of Roman tradition. His position was no longer just precarious. It was untenable. In the shadows, a conspiracy began to coalesce, a desperate alliance of senators and soldiers. It was spearheaded by a man with a deeply personal vendetta, Cassius Chaerea, a senior officer of the Praetorian Guard.
Chaerea was a veteran soldier, a man of proven courage. Yet Caligula took a perverse delight in mocking his high-pitched voice and supposed effeminacy, assigning him humiliating passwords like Priapus or Venus. For Chaerea, this was not just about saving Rome, it was about reclaiming his honor. Alongside him were other Praetorians, like Cornelius Sabinus, and influential senators, including Annius Vinicianus, who dreamed of restoring the long-dead republic. But their plotting was fraught with peril. Several previous attempts had been abandoned at the last minute, the conspirators losing their nerve. Their window of opportunity was closing. They settled on a new time and place, the final day of the Palatine Games. These games, held in honor of the divine Augustus, were a grand public spectacle of theater and sport, drawing the emperor and the entire court to the Palatine Hill. The conspirators knew that during the festival, security would be both heightened and chaotic, providing the perfect cover for their strike. Their entire plan hinged on one critical moment, separating Caligula from his loyal German bodyguard. These towering mercenaries were fiercely devoted to the emperor personally, not the state, and would slaughter anyone who threatened him without a moment's hesitation. The moment came around the 7th hour. Feeling unwell from the day's festivities, Caligula decided to leave the theater and head to his private apartments for lunch and a bath. Instead of taking the public route, he chose a shortcut, a narrow, semi-subterranean service tunnel known as the Cryptoporticus. He was accompanied only by a few attendants and a group of young actors he intended to rehearse with. For the first time that day, he was vulnerable. The trap was set. As Caligula walked through the gloomy passage, Chaerea stepped out from the shadows and approached him, a picture of military formality. He asked for the watchword. Caligula, ever the tormentor, smirked and gave another obscene, effeminate reply. It was the final insult. In that instant, Years of humiliation boiled over into cold fury. Chaerea drew his sword, shouting, "Accipe hoc! Take this!" and struck a heavy blow to Caligula's neck and jaw. The blow wasn't immediately fatal. Caligula cried out in pain and tried to run, but Cornelius Sabinus struck him from the other side, bringing him to his knees. Then the floodgates of vengeance burst open. The other conspirators, who had been hiding in the corridor, descended upon the fallen emperor. It was a massacre. They hacked and stabbed his body over and over, each blow a release of pent-up hatred. Ancient sources claim he suffered more than 30 wounds, with the assassins screaming questions at him as they struck. "Is this what you wanted? Are you a god now?" The man who believed himself a living deity was butchered in a dark, damp hallway, his divine pretensions extinguished in a pool of his own blood. The conspirators' work was not finished. Their purge was as ruthless as it was politically necessary. Any heir, no matter how young, could become a symbol for revenge. Caligula's wife, Milonia Caesonia, was found weeping over her husband's mutilated corpse. A centurion dispatched by Chaerea showed no mercy and ran her through with his sword. But the final, most chilling act was reserved for their daughter. The infant, Julia Drusilla, named for Caligula's beloved dead sister, was seized by the assassins. In a horrifying display of brutality, they smashed the child's head against a stone wall, extinguishing Caligula's line completely. The self-proclaimed liberators had stained their cause with the blood of a child. In the palace and across the city, chaos erupted. When the German bodyguard learned of the assassination, they flew into a blind rage, rampaging through the palace and killing several innocent men, including senators, before they could be brought under control. Meanwhile, the Senate convened, heady with the belief that their moment had come. They passionately debated the restoration of the Republic, delivering grand speeches about liberty. But it was all talk. They had no army, no unity, and no real plan. While they argued, the fate of Rome was being decided elsewhere. The Praetorian Guard had no intention of giving up the power and wealth that came with serving an emperor. They needed a new one, and fast. In the ensuing chaos, a lone guardsman named Gratus, searching the palace for plunder, noticed a pair of feet peeking out from behind a curtain. He pulled it back to find the last surviving adult male of the family, Caligula's uncle, the forgotten Claudius. Long dismissed as a feeble-minded invalid due to a stammer and a limp, Claudius had survived by playing the fool. Terrified, he begged for his life. But the Praetorians saw an opportunity. They needed an emperor, and here was a Julian, however flawed. They hoisted him onto their shoulders, carried him to the Praetorian camp, and declared him emperor. The Senate, faced with the military might of the Guard, had no choice but to ratify their decision. The dream of a restored republic died in a single night. One of Claudius's first acts was to order the execution of Cassius Chaerea and the other leading conspirators. The men who had killed a tyrant to, in their minds, save Rome, were put to death by the very regime they had inadvertently created. The reign of Caligula was over. The Senate issued an order to destroy his statues and erase his name from all public records, hoping to wipe the memory of his rule from history. But they failed. The story of the mad emperor, crafted by his enemies and embellished by time, had just begun. He remains an enigma, a tyrant, a victim of circumstance, and a terrifying, enduring cautionary tale about the absolute corruption that comes with absolute power. Thanks for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. How about hitting the like and subscribe button to be notified when we upload more videos on historical figures? And as always, thanks for watching.